Hey, everybody. Today I talk with my colleague and friend, Rich Dlin, about his blog post on his blog, Experience Has Made Me Rich. The post is from October 2024, entitled Jewish Identity and Excellence, the Challenge of Impossible Standards. And we compare that with Brett Stevens' recent State of World Jewry address at the 92nd Street Y. We'll link to everything in the show notes, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
So I've been on Facebook since it became cool for old people.
Yeah.
Right. Since we took it over and the young people left.
Right.
And I use it more than most people these days.
Mm-hmm.
I use it for lots of different things. But one of the things I've been doing for 15 years now is every time something occurs to me that I think is worth sharing, just a reflection or an observation, I call it philosophical thought for today. And I post it on my Facebook wall. And sometimes people who are reading them, they go, you should turn these into a book. Mm. I mean, I'm not going to turn this into a book. I mean, I'm just posting shit on Facebook. You know, it's like, so, but I thought about it and I thought it'd be interesting. Well, first of all, I can't even search my own feed to find every time I've posted that. Like, there's no clean way to get that. Right. Facebook even decides when I search my own feed what it will show me.
What's it going to show you? Yeah.
But I found a way to get a more or less comprehensive list. You have to trick the algorithm a little bit. And I started compiling it. And it's like each one is a paragraph or two at most. And I've been copying, pasting. And I'm at about 30 pages worth of content. So, and I still have about 8 years to go. And I ran it through ChatGPT. Like, what do you think of this? Is this a book? And ChatGPT says it's absolutely a book. You have to be careful though, because ChatGPT will agree with everything you say.
Right. That I would immediately be my suspicion asking a question like that.
Yeah, but I've tuned it. Like I've said to it, I need you to stop agreeing with me and encouraging me,
and be critical.
Yeah. And it has done that. So it ranked the different ones based on like publishability, readability, and so on, and then suggested that I turn them into one-page essays with a quotable quote at the end, so that somebody could like theoretically take that quote, put it up on a wall in a classroom or whatever, or put it on, a calendar. And I don't remember where I was going with. But so I think it's a good project, a fun project for me. I have no idea how I get it out there.
Yeah.
So like I read a book, so.
Yep.
And what editor is gonna? I mean, I don't know the answer to the question. It's a legitimate question. What editor is gonna read it, take the time? Publish it?
Right. So publishing still has like that ability to weed out, at least based on someone's tastes or market or whatever it is, and give you some sense of what's worth reading or not reading. I just think there are just many more sources that are filtering for us. And we're tuning in to an ever-increasing number of those sources based on our own particular interests.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. I have two questions that popped into my head. One is, what's your what gets you to the place where you want to post something? Like, because I have no social media presence, which is probably bad for what I want to do, right? Like in terms of
ultimately, yes, but at the moment, not really.
Right, and part of it is like I don't like I would eventually hire someone to manage a social media presence for me. I don't have. I know what it does to me emotionally to be drawn into that sort of connectedness, and I'm better off in my vis-a-vis myself not doing that. But I do think I struggle with what of what I write is worth putting out there and what's not. And I don't have a sort of process for doing that. I just sometimes feel like something's good or not good. And that's where I kind of like the publishing, because at least then you're forcing someone else, although they have their own agenda and their own, sort of thinking, but you're forcing someone else to look at it and tell you, yeah, this is good. This should go out there.
I don't make decisions about whether I'm going to post something. Generally speaking, a thought will occur to me, and a lot of the ways I work through a thought is to write.
Right.
And now I've written it, and so I'm going to put it up on my blog, not because I want people to read it or because I'm trying to generate an audience or anything like that, but because I've written it,
Yeah.
and it's my blog. So if you came here and you're interested to read what I've written, then fantastic. And
Right.
if not, I mean, you never found me anyway. When it comes to Facebook, though, like social media, there's always an undercurrent of agenda. So, but my agenda, I like to think is noble. Like, I'm not trying to manipulate anybody.
Right.
But after October 7th, for example, I found out who's who of my friends, my social media friends.
Right.
And some of them were pretty surprising. But I didn't do what a lot of people do. I didn't unfriend them.
Right.
And it's not because I still want to associate with them. I actually don't. I find them pretty odious, especially some of the ones who have gone really, really, really far.
And this is stuff that you just see them posting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason I haven't unfriended them is because I need to see it. I don't want to create a world where I'm unaware that this is what people are saying or this is what people are thinking. So I need to stay educated.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But because I'm friends with them on Facebook and I see what they're posting, they see what I'm posting.
Right.
But I will not engage with them. That never works. You can't engage with somebody's stupidity.
Not in that forum.
I've done it. Like I'm not going to say that I haven't been so stupid as to try. I have.
Right.
It never goes anywhere except to get me aggravated.
Right.
And further entrench them because it's confrontational.
Has anyone picked a fight with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know who Elika Laban is?
No.
She's an American Iranian. So I don't know her history. I couldn't tell you if she was born in Iran, but I suspect she was.
Right.
And I said American, but that's a lie. She has a very clear British accent, so she must be in
Anglo.
in the UK.
Yeah. It's like the joke is when you move to Israel, everyone who speaks English is an Anglo, wherever they come from.
I also suspect she is or was a model, but she's unbelievably articulate, like ridiculously articulate. And ever since October 7th, and probably before, she's been speaking out rationally, carefully about issues in the Middle East, about what's wrong with the way that people perceive it. And one thing she posted was really, really clear about why saying you're not anti-Semitic, just anti-Zionist is bullshit.
Right.
And the more you do it, and she listed some very common anti-Zionism
Right.
memes and angles and stuff, and talked about how you're contributing to anti-Semitism. And if you think you're not anti-Semitic, consider this. If you know you are, then I'm not talking to you anyway. And I thought it was really, really well put. And I posted it, and it was very much targeted at one particular person whose posts I've seen, who seems to he's even lost the need to filter himself. Like he'll sometimes say Jew when he means Zionist. And my intro to her video was, you should probably listen to this. If
Calling out this person or just
no. I posted it on
your thing.
Like,
right. Okay.
But the intro I said was something along the lines of, she speaks so well, she's so intelligent, she's so articulate, and she's so balanced. And this is worth listening to no matter who you are, but it's especially worth listening to if the word Zionist has become a slur in your vocabulary.
Interesting.
And that was definitely aimed at him. And I just posted it and I put it up there. He did end up watching it. He did end up watching it. He got so mad, he posted 5 different replies to it.
Oh, boy.
I responded to none of them.
Right.
There's no reason for me to respond. But he did the classic, and what, she's talking about how anti-Semitism hurts the Jews, but what about Islamophobia?
Right.
The what about is such a tired argument.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. In fact, what about almost defeats itself.
Yep.
Because if you're saying, but what about, then you've acknowledged that we have a problem over here. Why don't we? And if there's a problem with Islamophobia, we could spend time working on both, couldn't we?
Right. There is so much of that in the space of this Israel, Israel-Palestinian ecosphere, which is arguments by comparison always, right? So sure, you say this, but what about this, right? And we do the same thing, right? The Israel side does the same thing, where it's just like this endless like death by analogy, right? Like, and you're just constantly like, okay, but like let's actually just qualitatively evaluate this issue in and of itself, because if all you're doing is projecting off of, well, we're not as bad as them, and they're saying, well, we're not as bad as you, and then like you're not getting anywhere productive.
No, it becomes too many people are just trying to win by
Yep.
by whatever means necessary. Truth is not high on the list of priority, because you don't win with truth, you win with consensus, and so that's really what they want.
So I have this other thought, like about truth in this argument, is I think part of the reason why truth is so hard to come by in Israel related conversations is that everything is true all at once.
Yeah.
Right. And because everything is true all at once, you can't, there's no clearly I mean, there's some extreme you can get to that's demonstratively false, right? But for the most part, it's very hard to actually get to that extreme. And also because everything is true all at once, you can't really take any slice and make it your slice. All slices become propaganda to a certain extent, right? Because what's propaganda? Propaganda doesn't need to be false. Let's not assume false propaganda. Right? Propaganda is something that's true but ignores everything else, right? That might be true. And almost any slice you take out of this issue is going to fit that criteria on either side, right? So it's true that horrible stuff happens in war. And horrible stuff happens because people do really bad things, and the line between good and evil runs down the human heart, and every human being, is capable of, every human being holding a gun in a war zone on either side of that war is capable of very good things and very horrible things, and that's all true at the same time. And it's also true that there are lots of versions of why we should be here, what our story is, and those are all true. They all have truth at the same time, and like it's almost like impossible to get at any one narrative. Like no one's going to own a narrative that's true.
It's something most people aren't capable of internalizing. I think depending on the culture you come from, some cultures celebrate that many things can be true at once. But Western culture doesn't. Western culture is good guy, bad guy.
Yeah.
Oppressor, repressed.
So I want to jump in. So I want to actually look at two things. I wasn't sure exactly where I was going to go with this until I sat down with it. But I want to look at your blog post written on Experience Has Made Me Rich. Great name for your blog. Jewish Identity and Excellence, the Challenge of Impossible Standards. And I want to contrast that to the Bret Stephens speech that you joined my class discussion about this week, where he makes essentially four arguments for changing the approach we have to anti-Semitism, the general broad North American, let's say, approach to anti-Semitism. And so I want to summarize your piece. I want to summarize Bret Stephens. You know both, so you can jump in if you think I'm missing any key piece, and then we'll kind of open that up. So here's your piece, right? Jews are held to an impossible standard, right? That's that's in the identity of being Jewish. You talk about an experience that everyone who has taught at a Jewish school or has gone to Jewish school, I think across any spectrum, any part of the Jewish community knows well, which is the field trip, right? So you go on the field trip as a Jewish school, and I grew up in a more, let's say, right of center Orthodox Jewish setting, right? So they would call it Kiddush Hashem, right? Which is, essentially sanctification of God's name, right? And an important responsibility for the Jew. But when you grow up in yeshivish or Haredi circles, it becomes almost, which are so insular and so often not engaged with the larger world. Kiddush Hashem is like the thing they need to remind you of when you go out into the world. Like, don't spill out all of your garbage, right, and all of the bad traits that you have into the world. Make sure you're mindful of how the other is thinking about you. And that was always true with the bus driver. Don't be, these were all boys' schools, so we were, just a group of rowdy boys. Don't be rowdy on the bus. Make sure you behave yourself. Make sure you say thank you. Make sure you chant, 2468. Who do we appreciate? The bus driver, right? Like all of these different things that we would do. And then I went to teach at Ramaz, which is a much more engaged. It's an Orthodox Jewish high school, but it runs the gamut of actual personal observance among its community and its student body, and it was the same thing. Always the stress was always realize you're a Jew when you're outside, and your reflection on that is that this works. That this experience of being self-conscious of your Jewishness in settings with non-Jews is both unfair and works, right? It's unfair in that why should your Jewishness be the most defining feature when you walk outside as opposed to just being a group of teenagers, right? Or a group of middle schoolers or whatever it might be, right? Why are you constantly need to be mindful of this otherness that you have and how the people outside are going to judge you for that otherness. But at the same time, it's formative and it's positive because you're being held to this higher standard. Constantly, you're holding yourself to this higher standard, and that forms you and shapes you and makes you stronger. And the metaphor you give is the egg, right? Which when it's boiled gets harder. Did I miss anything key there?
No, it sounds pretty accurate.
Okay, good. So now we got Bret Stephens. Okay, so Bret Stephens gives this speech at the 92nd Street Y, and he's describing why we should change our approach to anti-Semitism. And it's really interesting because, if you bookended, right, the immediate post-Holocaust era and the post-October 7th era, there's a really interesting thing going on because I think, and I'm not like I don't know this like as a student of this piece of history, so I could be totally wrong about this, but feels right. Post-Holocaust, there is a sense in the North American Jewish community, a sense that we did not do enough, that we were not well organized enough, that we did not exert our influence as American Jews in a way that did enough to save European Jews. And part of that was because the melting pot identity, right, which at some point was replaced by multiculturalism, even in the United States, right? That's the whole Canadians think they own multiculturalism and the U.S. doesn't. But the melting pot identity in the pre-World War II reality of the United States really put Jews in the position that they wanted to be American. They wanted to be Jewish in synagogue on Saturday and be American in every other aspect of their lives. And because of that, they didn't build strong institutions to assert their Jewishness or assert Jewish interests in American life. And the Holocaust happens, and there are many Jews trying to save European Jews. There are many Jews trying to save European Jews, and work with the government. And there's this famous trip that rabbis take to meet Roosevelt, but I think in the end they don't get an audience with him. They get an audience with one of his cabinet members. This is all these different events that happen. And I think the attitude coming out of that was, this never again attitude. Like, we need to create these strong institutions that spot anti-Semitism early, that call it out early, that try and combat it, that are always engaged with what is going on so that it never just sneaks up on you in the way there was the perception of it happening in Europe. And I think I'm right about that. Post October 7th, right, you have, Bret Stephens actually says this, you have never had a better institutionally structured, funded apparatus of organizations advocating for Jewish interests in the States. And you have October 7th. And, are these institutions, the question naturally comes up, are these institutions serving us well as a community? And Bret Stephens, as far as I can tell, is the first person to suggest, no, they're not. And we actually need to rethink this, that what we thought was the best format post-Holocaust may not actually be the best format. And he has sort of 4 ideas for what we should do to make his case. The first is to stop fighting anti-Semitism, right? Because the way he reads it is the fight against anti-Semitism is built on the idea that if just we provided the right hasbara, the right propaganda, the right information, right, we would solve anti-Semitism, right? We'd get rid of anti-Semitism. And that's just transparently not true, right? That at the end of the day, anti-Semitism is rooted in something much deeper, will always be there. And combating it through education and information is not going to accomplish anywhere near the investment that's being made in it, right? And so I don't think he's saying that it's not going to do anything, but relative to the millions and millions of dollars that are being invested in it, we could do better with that money. And that leads him into his next point, which is that the reason anti-Semitism is not just an information problem that can be corrected with better information is that Judaism is actually somewhat subversive, right? And because it's subversive to the larger order of things in many different ways, and he gives a lot of different examples of this, but effectively it could be summed up with, we hold ourselves apart. We say no a lot to broader culture, whatever it might be, broader ideas, other religions, and so on and so forth. Similar to what you were saying before about the Jews in Egypt, right? And because we hold ourselves apart, right, that and are always othering ourselves to a certain extent, we're going to be subversive to whatever larger structure wants to subsume us, and that's a reality. And with that will always come the psychological reaction of envy and hatred. That is just part of the human condition. It's part of the dynamic, right? And he has this great analogy where if you get rejected by a potential love interest, you will get angry. I was rejected for publication by a website that I wanted to publish on, and I got super angry. I mean, for like 10 minutes, and then I sort of caught myself. I'm like, maybe I need to check myself. But that's just the natural human dynamic. And to the extent that people are self-aware and developed, they will realize that this is silly. And to the extent that lots of humans are not, they will indulge this. And that is always going to be there in some psychological way. And so we're never going to defeat it or get rid of it. And then he says, therefore, what we need to do, point number 3, is invest in Judaism. So take all these millions of dollars we're investing in putting information out there to the other, right? And trying to get them to other us less or see us differently, and just invest it in our own institutions and building up our own identity and strengthening our own community. And then his last point is, don't be a victim, right? So at the end of the day, we should stop playing this identity card of we are this small group being victimized. We should sort of just stay within ourselves. You could sum up his ideas in a very crudely simple way, which is we should turn inward and strengthen ourselves. And that actually is going to, maybe paradoxically be the best antidote to anti-Semitism. I think I did. I think I got that one, right?
From what I understood from him, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So here's the thing. You got the Jewish field trip experience, right? What is the Jewish field trip experience? Pay attention to how others will judge you, right? So you have two things. You have Bret Stephens saying, let's stop caring about so much how others see us. At the end of the day, the way the other sees us is this psychological dynamic playing out. That's inevitable. Rich, you say, pay attention to how others judge you, not because it's so important to defeat anti-Semitism, right? But because actually developing that self-consciousness of the other and how the other thinks about you makes you stronger, right? That's essentially your argument. So this is what I'm curious about, right? If I had to put this in a question, is Jewish identity tied to Jewish self-consciousness? Do we need to be worried about the other and how the other sees us and judges us, whether or not that will change the other's mind, right, is less relevant. But do we need to have that self-consciousness in order to form our identity? The analogy I would give is like, if you have a parent who just expects a lot of their child, right? So I struggle with this, let's say, with my oldest, right? Who's definitely my most difficult of my 3 children. And, he's also the oldest. And so I, in some sense, I want to push his awareness of his place in the family, and that comes with some additional responsibility, like maybe not torturing his younger siblings whenever he has the chance, just for the sheer pleasure of it, right? But at the same time, I also don't want to put too much undue expectation on him, right? And this is to me, at the core of the same struggle. It's like, to what extent do you want to create a framework that says you are going to be held to a higher standard because of your position, right? But that, and that's for your good. Like, you need that. That will make you stronger and more resilient and harder. And you can go through any number of stories of people who've accomplished great things, who've had that psychological dynamic in their past of someone holding them to a higher standard and pushing them, and being unfair and not being equal, but it being something that created them. Is that necessary for Jewish identity?
I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind. So first of all, you can't ignore the other. The other put us in concentration camps and killed 6 million of us. So if you just say the other is not important and I don't care what they think, you run the risk of running into reality, which is sometimes the other is important. And sometimes their perception of you does matter. And nothing about that is fair. Mm-hmm. When I tell kids to hold themselves to a higher standard, I don't frame it that this is good for them. In fact, that's a conclusion I only came to much later. I frame it as, I'm sorry, this is the real world. One of the things that sort of guides my principle is teach children about the world we want and teach them how to live in the world we have. And those are two ideas that conflict. If you have a daughter, you want her to be able to walk safely at night and not have to worry about getting assaulted or raped.
Right.
You want that world.
Right.
But that isn't the world we have. And so if you teach your daughter that, go into any neighborhood, don't worry about it. Dress however you want, don't worry about it. If other people are raising their boys to be rapists, then that's on them. It is until the moment she gets raped. And so, there's the world we want and then there's the world we have, and you have to understand both. You have to work towards the former and live in the latter. And that's for Jews, for anyone. But in this context of our conversation, for Jews, that's a reality. So I'm sorry that when you go on the field trip, you can't just fool around like normal teenagers. Right. I'm sorry, because I wish you could. We do that at home. We do that when the doors are closed. We do that inside the building. But when we're outside, we can't. And that's just a reality. And that's a lesson that I think that a lot of Jewish people in the diaspora have to learn.
But don't you think that to play devil's advocate on that, does that just create this unhealthy complex of concern with the other, notwithstanding the fact that there is a point where the other will intrude upon our lives to the extent that we must be concerned, right? And let's put that aside for just a minute, right? And because I want to get back to that, but does it take you to a place where you have such an unhealthy conception of, you have such an unhealthy obsession with the other that you, instead of defining your identity on your own positive vision, you become somewhat obsessed with, all I want is to be, this is the Jewish condition, is all I want is to be accepted. All I want is to be my Jewish self, but also just be accepted by everyone else, right? This is the, and you've been part of these classes, which is why we didn't get the chance before vacation to really dive into how Bret Stephens compares to what we were looking at, which was early Zionist thinkers, right? But this is your Herzl versus Jabotinsky idea, right? Where for Herzl, there was this strong desire in his writing to be like everyone else. And he also recognized that was impossible in Europe, but still held out hope that it might be possible if we could just have our own state. Right. That then we could be an equal sovereign among other sovereigns, right? Whereas Jabotinsky was, much more pragmatic and realistic, certainly in hindsight, and says, we're not going to be equal, right? Like we're always going to be hated. Perhaps he saw this condition that Bret Stephens, describes. And so in that view, is it healthy to continually pine, even though it's going to make you stronger and it's going to build up your identity, continually pine for the acceptance of the other, right? And as if I just behave nicely enough, a person won't walk away saying, that was crazy Jewish kids, right, on the field trip. And maybe they'll have a moment where they'll say, oh, those Jewish kids were actually nice. That I shouldn't care about that, because that obsession is never, it breeds in me this sense that I could get somewhere. I could get to this place this magical place where, people will see me as a Jew and just understand that I'm just like everyone else.
Right. So in fact, my thoughts on it and Stephen's thoughts on it are actually aligned. I'm not saying that we should care about anti-Semitism, about the anti-Semite. Let's put it that way. The anti-Semite, anti-Semitism are two related but different phenomena.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, anti-Semites, or anti-Semitism, I guess, is like the narcissistic sister that you have, who you will never do anything right for, because you can't do anything right for, because their pathology is such that you must always be wrong. And so they'll look at what you're doing, they'll define that as wrong, and then tell you that the opposite is right. And then when you shift, because they've defined what right means, they change the goalpost again. That's the essence of narcissism. And so that's what anti-Semitism is, and you won't win, because the trick to living in the same world as a narcissistic relative is to recognize that you can't engage, that their playing field is not a playing field designed for anyone but themselves, and just being on it already means you've lost. So I can't go, an anti-Semite throws up an argument about what Jews are, and you say, no, that's not true. What have you done? You've just given them the ability to judge whether to judge your justification. You can't do that. But at the same time, since I have to go out and live in the world where anti-Semitism exists, and my own safety matters, I don't need to give them ammunition. So it's not fighting anti-Semitism; it's just not feeding it. And there's a difference.
Don't feed the beast.
Yeah. So I recognize it's there, and I won't engage. And the way I don't engage is I hold myself to the highest possible standard. And all mythologies, whether it's religion or what we think of as mythology now, but actually was religion, they all have this concept of those held to the highest standard are the ones who fall the furthest, and it always feels wrong. Like Moses, who, what did he do wrong?
Right. And
gets this harshest of punishments. And we're meant to take lessons from that. And the lessons aren't fair. They aren't fair. But that's reality. So this it's not fair, but it's reality is a big theme for me. So what am I saying? I'm saying, no, we're not trying to fight anti-Semitism. We're trying to say, your anti-Semitism is yours. I'm going to rise up, not to give you any ammunition. And that's reality.
So that I still want to come back to the threatening point, the point about the actual threats that really exist and being aware of them, because I think that's important to discuss. But I want to push on this particular point. So now let's read that back into what does that look like as educators going on a field trip? Because to me, the simply make sure everyone understands that, make sure everyone watching us has the best impression of the Jew because of how you behave, can go in either, someone could see it the way you're describing it, although that's a more complex way of looking at it. I think the more simple sort of visceral psychological reaction is, oh my God, I have to be worried about what others think of me, right? Like I grew up in a house where the messaging strongly was like, don't care what anyone thinks of you. Like you do what you are. And my parents were not mainstream in our community, like the shul we davened at was this like, what you would call a shtibel, which is like this old school Hungarian, Hasidically influenced small shul. And lots of people cared about everyone else's business and how they dressed and what they did. And my parents were oblivious to it, right? We didn't talk about it at the Shabbat table. It was irrelevant to us. And what I discovered later on, more like from off comments that my dad made, but then I became closer with my uncle later in life. And he talked a lot about my dad and his experience growing up. And they both felt very strongly that their mother, all she cared about, my grandmother, who died when I was a kid, all she cared about was what other people thought. So they were acting in reaction, to that. But the point is, if you grow up in that environment where you're told to care about what other people think, then you start to define yourself off of how other people think.
Right.
So how, as educators, do we parse that? Like, how do we express the good desire that you're saying, like you should not feed the beast, you should not care what they think of you, but care about how you act yourself, use their potential thoughts as a way to improve yourself versus, create a psychological dynamic where you're worrying about what everyone thinks of you.
So yeah, it's interesting. I don't frame it that way. I don't, right. When I'm talking to the kids and when I think about it for myself, I'm not saying you should care what they think.
Right.
I'm saying I know what they will think. And that's a reality. And what we can do is hold ourselves to a higher standard, not for them.
Right. But that, I don't think I've ever heard that. I mean, it's fascinating if that's the message you're delivering in the bus ride or before you go out or when you're calming that group of, kids being kids. Like, I don't think I've heard lots of various iterations of the Kiddush Hashem need, make sure you make a Kiddush Hashem, right? But I've never heard someone say it's not for them, right? It's for us. Like, we don't actually care what they think. But that would be fascinating.
It is my position. I know what they think. And because I know what they think, I know that I won't change their mind. So part of it is, I don't need to prove that they're right. Like I can be conscious of not doing something that will enforce whatever it is that they think. But I don't even care about that. I always tell teenagers, teenagers are wonderful to work with because they're like adults in training. They're standing on this like border with one foot in adulthood and one foot in childhood. And they're often conscious of which foot they're placing their weight on.
Yeah.
And they actually know how to place their weight on one foot versus the other. And when you're that age, it's fun to still behave like a child sometimes, but you also know that you're able to behave like an adult, and most of them can flick the switch.
Yeah.
And so I say, this is such a beautiful thing to see because I'm not mad at you in any way for choosing the childhood switch, like for putting your weight on that foot. It's I miss it. The older you get, the harder it is to sort of do it. But
you have a great quote I want to get to. It's actually like a thing I want to, after we talk about this, I pulled it out, that your description of being a teenager and why it's great being a high school teacher. That paragraph is fantastic. We'll get to it in a second. Yeah.
So I love it. And part of my job as an educator is to say, listen, when you choose that adult foot, which I know you're capable of doing, let's look at why we choose to choose it, or why, like when we choose it, why, and maybe sometimes we'd rather not, but we know we can. And look at what you learn. Like, look at what you can go home and say to yourself. I had lunch in that park in Washington, D.C., and I picked up my garbage and put it in the garbage can. But not only that, my friends who didn't, I walked over and I picked up their garbage and put it in the garbage can. And I didn't do it for the image that I was giving the outside world, although I know what that meant. I did it because now I know I can. I know that I can take that responsibility of picking up my garbage and picking up somebody else's garbage and put it in the garbage can. And I've just proven to myself who I can be. And by constantly getting compressed into that highest standard, you learn that you can live there. And that shows you what you're capable of, and that shows you how often you can flick other switches that you have. We all have moments where we're choosing between something we probably would rather choose, but it's too hard, or we don't feel like it, and then so we take an easy way out or whatever. But we all know, I think all of us know, that we're not living to our maximum potential.
Right.
Whatever that means. But by holding them to this highest standard, which is not fair, but it shows them that they can live to this potential.
Don't make them right about you.
And I suspect part of, like, there's a whole cultural aspect to Judaism that contributes to this as well. But just having to live in a world where you have to hold yourself to that high standard, therefore proving to yourself that you can live up to that standard, contributes to the excellence that, the anti-Semite then uses against us. Well, it's okay. As Golda Meir said, I'd rather be alive and hated than dead and pitied. So if it's going to be bad for me either way, then I choose excellence. And if you're gonna be mad at me for that, well, I guess you're going to be mad at me anyway. So
yeah. I really like that. And I think the challenge for educators is to think about how you can, in a short soundbite to a group of, 12 to 18-year-olds express that idea such that you're reinforcing that message and not this like obsession with how the other sees you message.
Right. Because it's a distinction not everybody will notice.
Right. And these are the like I actually just working on a piece right now that kind of hones in on this. They're ideas that animate sort of the philosophies of the labels under which we associate, right? And all those ideas are developed like philosophical ideas are developed with depth and thought and research and so on. But most of that doesn't filter down to the average person living those ideas. But certain key things get through, and they're just like in the drinking water, right? So I grew up yeshivish, as I said. In the drinking water was the outside world is outside, the inside world is inside. Our job is to keep the outside world outside.
Yeah.
Right? That was like just, and there's lots of philosophy behind that. And there's lots of complicated, interesting ways of explaining that idea. But the idea filtered through to every single one of us, right? I think the Kiddush Hashem on a field trip is one of those ideas that almost anyone who had a Jewish school experience has, right? But how we integrate those ideas, right, is important. And we don't think often about that. The idea is getting through, right, in the immediate sense of behave yourself, right, or act to this higher standard. But what is the person taking away? What depth is the person taking away? Is it the intended depth, right, that there's this sort of, great opportunity to improve yourself and to use the other instead of worrying about the other? And how can you, if you want to make sure the right message is getting through, make that ubiquitous, like make that part of this like repeated messaging that you're doing?
The trick is, it's not a trick. The idea is that if you're delivering the message, you have to know what it is. And then once you enter that mindset, once you really understand, then you don't have to try, because that's the only thought you're capable of transmitting. Like you can't, if you feel like you're trying to craft a message so that they understand your thought, then you've taken it to a level of artificialness, I guess. Mm. So it's like when you're in if you're in a conflict, you're having an argument with somebody, and if all you're doing is trying to convince them that you're right, the argument goes nowhere.
Right.
You have to step deeper. You have to like internalize everything. There can be no false flavor to anything you're saying. So when you're in a conflict with someone, understanding their side, which is taught as a technique, it's not a technique. It's critical. You don't pretend to understand their side. You must understand their side, and only once you do will that technique they use in conflict resolution actually work, because people can sense if you're patronizing them or if you're really truly describing it. So to come back to this,
that's really interesting you say that, by the way, because I think that the students push back when we watch the Bret Stephens video. One of the things that this didn't happen at the girls' school, happened at the boys' school, but the boys push back on. But Hasbara still works because there are lots of people who don't have their mind made up yet. So sure, you're not going to convince the true anti-Semite with more information not to be an anti-Semite. But there are lots of people who are just sort of floating through the world, absorbing information. And if you don't counter that information, that's all they're going to absorb. And I think what you just said challenges that idea. Because actually, most people will just realize propaganda for what it is on both sides, right? And if they're not engaged with the debate because they have a particular reason to be engaged with the debate of whether Jews are good or bad, they're just going to be like, this is just a lot of noise, right? Or whatever, right? There's not really going to be a meaningful engagement. People who meaningfully want to form an opinion on something are going to need something that's much more substantive in order to form that opinion.
Which you can't do in an essay or a meme or a TikTok video. Right. That group of people, the group of people who are not uneducated, because that's not the right word, they're just oblivious. Like I met people, I was in Ghana a couple of years ago. It was after October 7th. And, I met people who didn't know that October 7th had happened.
Right.
Me coming from Canada, where everyone knows it happened, what they think about it is vastly different. But I met people who didn't know what happened. Okay, so here's a person who's completely oblivious. They're not uneducated. That's not even the right word. They're non-educated. That might be a better word. So, I mean, if I give them my side, then they might say, oh, that, I met this guy from Canada and he explained this to me and now I know what's going on. But someone who's been around long enough or has thought long enough knows that, no, that's not what happened. They learned a story from somebody and that person theoretically thought the story was true. Maybe they were trying to mislead me, but I don't know. The only way to get that education is long-term exposure to everything. So if you're Jewish and you're looking at that category of person who doesn't know, and you want to make sure they get your side, then that's the wrong approach. The way they get your side is to learn who you are. So you must be you. And this goes back to...
That's great.
When I tell them to hold themselves to a higher standard, I'm not saying make yourself someone else. I'm saying be the best person you could be.
So in this Brett Stevens model, which you're clearly agreeing with, it's like better to put out the TikTok shorts about Judaism and just express the beauty, positivity of Judaism than to put out TikTok shorts trying to counter the narrative of someone who's accusing you of whatever they're accusing you of or saying whatever they're saying about you.
We know that doesn't work.
Right.
Okay, it works in some instances. Like somebody says, oh, I heard that Israel did this, this, and this. I hate Bibi. And then you take the this and this and this, and you patiently demonstrate how they're either not correct or you missed some nuance. You do encounter the odd person who goes, oh, okay, thank God I hadn't thought about that.
Right, but that's not.
It's very rare.
Yeah.
It's very rare because they come preloaded. So like what are you going to do with that? There's a woman whose name I forget. She was a daughter of the founder of the Westboro Baptist Church, or the granddaughter.
Oh shoot, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But it's not going to come to me.
Yeah. And she's not in that church anymore, and she speaks about the insanity of being raised in that. But she didn't know it was insane.
Yeah, I can't remember her name.
I think I don't know if I'm quoting her correctly or anything, but I think her mother still doesn't speak to her, but I could be wrong. But she still loves her mother, and she talks about that. But who was the beginning of her seeing her world from the outside? You know who it was? A rabbi.
Is it Megan Phelps Roper?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And a rabbi, and she had a whole set of a whole narrative built around what it means to be Jewish and what a Jew is. And she meets this rabbi and attacks him with all this venom that she's been taught, and he doesn't try to convince her she's wrong. He doesn't argue any of it. He just invites her over for dinner. And I don't know why she goes. But the fact that she goes and then he just acts Jewish. That's all he does. And he asks her questions and he's interested in her life. And she's like, whoa, this is totally dissonant with what I thought was the case. Okay. And so that goes to something else, which is you can only believe something you're prepared to believe. She, despite all the efforts of her parents and grandparents, was still prepared to believe that she could be wrong about Jews. But someone who was not prepared to believe that, it would never have worked. So something about her it must be genetic. It must be like, but so that's a win, right? But what did he do? He didn't do it by attacking her.
By countering her points.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about two more things. One is I want to go back to what you said about needing to be aware that there's bad out there. In other words, I can't just bury my head in the sand and be like, I'm just going to invest internally in being Jewish and not worry at all about the hatred that's out there, because there is hatred out there, and 6 million Jews died as a result of that hatred, and 1,000 on October 7th or whatever the number was. And so we need to be aware of the hatred. And I think Brett Stevens, I briefly saw a sort of follow-up interview with him about it, and he he said, like, his goal wasn't to say the ADLs should be dismantled in the sense of we shouldn't be tracking anti-Semitic incidents and understand that they're out there. He was talking much more about this sort of hasbara, counter-narrative, combating anti-Semitism informationally. So what's your Holocaust awareness as a child? Like, is it in your family? Is it outside your family? How do you kind of grow up with that?
It's woven deep into it. So first of all, my grandfather was the only one of 13 siblings to survive. So he had two kids, my father and my aunt. My aunt married a man with a number on his arm. My whole life, I thought my cousin's last name was Rosen, but it wasn't. Because when the camps were liberated, he didn't have any papers. There was a woman there who still had the papers from her husband who didn't survive.
So took those papers.
And she gave him the papers. She said, "Here, you take these papers. Your name is now Izzy Rosen." His real name is Horowitz, and it wasn't until much, much, much later that they changed their name back. And in fact, one of my cousins didn't. She still goes by Rosen. She grew up as Rosen. So,
did you have a hiding place as a kid?
Like,
in your head, like a place you knew, like, if the Nazis come, here's the place in my house I can hide.
So that's interesting. No, but Hitler was a swear word.
Right.
You weren't allowed to say it.
Yamach Shemo. That was what I had, right? You had to say, if you said Hitler, you had to say Yamach Shemo, which means erase his name.
Yeah,
it's like Voldemort.
You weren't allowed. Yeah. There were two words that were forbidden. One was the F word, and the other one was Hitler. Right. Those were the only two words I wasn't allowed to say. But I didn't know that my uncle was a survivor. I didn't know that my grandfather was one of 13 that survived. None of that. Nobody told me that. Nobody taught me that. I only discovered that or learned it later as an adult. But also I went to Hebrew day school for 13 years, kindergarten through grade 9. The Holocaust education is built into that.
Right.
So, and as again, you're growing up, you don't know that you're learning something most people don't learn. You just think everybody knows what you know about the Holocaust. You find out as you get older that that's not true. My grandfather, not only did he make it out, but it's only through like 19 flukes of chance that I even live in Canada. None of that was supposed to happen. And it was all the Holocaust and after effects of the Holocaust. So yeah, did I grow up around? Yes, my mother-in-law was a survivor. Steven Spielberg did a big series called Shoah.
Yeah, sure. Where
he went around and interviewed my mother-in-law and my wife's grandmother are both interviewed in that series. The stories that you only learn as they get older, they don't want to talk about it when they're younger.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question is it runs through me, but not because I knew, but because the family that I grew up in and the environment that I was in had been produced by it, had survived it.
So let me contrast that, like, say, in my experience, where I think my father very much had a similar experience to you, so my grandmother had 5 brothers who were killed. She managed to get to America before the war, but it was obviously a part of my dad's life growing up. And for him, nobody talks about it. Like, it was there, it was present, people knew about it, but it wasn't spoken about. By the time it filtered into my generation, it was spoken about, right? I was aware of it, and that made me scared, right? As a kid. And so I had these, escape rooms, these places, I'd hide under, there's a floorboard because, I heard this story of the kid who had to hide, or the Anne Frank story. Right. And so we would know where we were going to, my friends, we would talk about this, where we were going to go if the Nazis came. And the reason I raise this in the context of talking about the real dangers out there is I think that part of the Jewish psyche, and again, getting back to what's healthy or unhealthy in terms of how we see the other and the threats, part of the Jewish psyche is we have to be vigilant. That there was this lack of vigilance on the part of, every time something bad happens, it's because we weren't vigilant. So pre-Holocaust, the Jews in Europe were reliant on their assimilation or on the authorities of the countries they lived in to protect them, and that failed. October 7th, Similarly, we weren't vigilant enough. We were too busy infighting. The IDF was mismanaged. There were all sorts of different things that are coming out, will come out, and so on, that we weren't vigilant. Is that a real thing? Like, as if like we need this, Chris Rock has this great routine about anti-Black racism. He has the same, psychological dynamic that he has to make sure no white person would ever surprise him if they turned out to be a racist. Like, it could be the nicest person, be like, I knew it, right? Because everyone in some sense has to be there, right? Like, is this a healthy thing that we're always looking like as if we could stop the next thing from happening if we were just vigilant enough? Or is that an unhealthy dynamic?
Well, that's a question I hadn't really considered, but in the moment, what I'm thinking is, first of all, how do we know we weren't vigilant enough? We only know what happened. We don't really know how many people there were doing their best to stave it off. History is what it is. But vigilance can't be a bad thing. As you were asking me the question, I was thinking about the line in Fiddler on the Roof near the beginning, and he says, "You may ask, why do we stay up there if it's so dangerous? We stay because Anatevka is our home." And I think about that line a lot. Right now in Canada, it's arguable that it's not a good place to be Jewish, but I could leave.
But you don't.
I could go to Israel, and I do think about the fact that pre-Holocaust, if you saw what was happening, you couldn't go to Israel. There was no Israel. Otto Frank had to hide his family in an attic, in an annex. There was nowhere to go. But why don't I go? Well, I was raised in Canada. This is my home. I stay because Canada is my home. And so does vigilance is fine, but when push comes to shove, will you do what you need to do? You've been vigilant. Okay, the writing's on the wall. You've seen it coming. Are you going to do what you need to do? So I guess to tie it all together, yes, you absolutely need to be vigilant because they will kill you. They will kill you en masse. And then what? We still haven't recovered. The Jewish population still hasn't recovered from pre-Holocaust numbers. We have to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. Does it make for an unhealthy view of the world? Probably. But once again, we have to live in the world that we live in.
Yeah, but see, my pushback on that is I wouldn't say it's an unhealthy view of the world. I think that it's creating a kind of negative obsession in your own mind, right? That drags you into a negative place, right? In other words, can you be a Jew who doesn't spend his time worrying about when the next Holocaust is coming, when the next October 7th is coming, right? And again, I get it. Like, if the leadership of the IDF is thinking that way, that's really bad news, right? But I think we extend that to if every person isn't constantly worried, and maybe those two have to go together. Maybe you need the constant vigilance to cycle up to the leadership who is in some ways reactive to the people. And if the people are constantly worried and vigilant, then the leadership will be constantly worried and vigilant, and then we'll actually, stop. And it's true. I mean, and this is the specialness of having in Israel is that actually these incidents do get thwarted in an infinite number of situations. I guess my question is do we have to pay the psychological price of that constant vigilance? It's,
as you said earlier, many things can be true at once.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to hold it. You have no choice. So, in some sense, it's not even worth talking about, but it goes back to what I was saying about, your daughter's going to go to a dangerous neighborhood or put herself in a dangerous situation. And it shouldn't be true that that's a dangerous situation. But it is. And you have to be able to hold both things. You have to be able to say, I shouldn't have to be vigilant, but I'm going to be. And does it make women, let's just talk about women and their safety concerns. Does it make them paranoid in certain situations? I know that it does. Like, I've talked to women who are like, must be nice to be a man who could just walk to the convenience store at night and not worry about it. And when I hear that, I go, you know what? I guess it must be, because it didn't even cross my mind, and here it is crossing yours. So does that make life bad. And furthermore, did they really have to worry about going to the convenience store at night? Or are they just being paranoid? And the answer is yes to both. And you have to be able to hold that. So I guess what you have to do is you have to be vigilant also at the same time for obsession. Don't be obsessed with your vigilance. Don't be obsessed with your ignorance. I was just listening to a podcast. Jonah Platt has his podcast, and he was talking to Howie Mandel, and he was saying, I'm not worried about anti-Semitism. You know, if I think about every day of my life, I don't encounter anti-Semitism. I see it online. I see it in my Facebook feed, in my Instagram, whatever. But in the people that I meet, I experience zero of it. So I'm not worried about it. I see his point. Right. Me too. In my day-to-day life, I experience none of it. Right. The experience I have of it is all virtual. So I should not get obsessed with my Facebook feed.
That will create negative. It has the risk in the same way, you know, the Kiddush Hashem argument has the risk of creating this obsession with what the other thinks, right? The constant vigilance of anti-Semitism, especially in a world where you're necessarily paying attention to a universe that is much larger than what humans have had to pay attention to for most of their history, right? Which is, you know, well documented as creates all sorts of itself unhealthy dynamics that we're constantly engaged with everything happening in every corner of the world, right? As opposed to what actually impacts us, which is, you know, the immediate sphere of probably 100 people who we interact with on a regular basis.
It's all we're evolutionary wired to understand anyway.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's this downside though. There's this downside that you know, you need it, because you need to signal to your community leaders and organizations and, you know, what's important to support and so on, that vigilance is important, but you can lose yourself in it.
Which I've seen people do.
Yeah.
So and it's really, really, really hard. It's really hard to hold a thought that is high priced and not become obsessed with it. I'm not sure how many people can do it. It requires a great deal of pragmatism. It probably requires that you understand Stoicism pretty deeply.
Right.
And so maybe it's worth, you know, putting into the to the curriculum some Marcus Aurelius. But that's what choice do we have? You know, this is the way that I view it.
Yeah. Okay, I want to shift gears. Just because this one paragraph you wrote really stood out to me, and I'm struggling with it, honestly, because I appreciate it so much. It rings true to me, but it's also different from how I've actually acted as an educator. So you're describing the experience of just spending time with teens, right, as a high school teacher. Teenagers are fundamentally awesome people. Despite culture, geopolitical, and socioeconomic differences, the brilliance, goofiness, and awkwardness is universal. So too are occasional bouts of acting like an idiot. And the ability to be able to turn these characteristics on and off when the situation really warrants is also universal. They're ultra cool adults in training who still have the little kid in them, but are learning how to manifest the grown-ups they will become. All while learning about and exercising their inevitable independence from older generations. They score huge victories. They make huge mistakes. If the child is the raw material, then the adolescent is the forge from which the ultimate adult emerges, tempered into that special alloy of perfection and flaws that we experienced adults all know all too well. That we experienced adults all know we are. Witnessing this blossoming is an honor and is what makes me so grateful to be an educator. For a teacher, students are like your kids. And when I witness them just being teens, I feel legitimate happiness, even when they're acting like idiots.
Yeah, that's true.
It's really well said. So I love that. I think that is an appreciation that I'm not aware of enough as an educator. I'm so in my own world as a teacher. Like, it's all about me figuring out ways to explain things clearly and gauge them with ideas and so on, that I don't take enough time, and possibly also because I was principal for 10 years or an administrator for more than 10 years. And I've just been sort of removed from that day-to-day life of the classroom until this year. I mean, I taught always, but not as much as I'm teaching now. But there's something really beautiful about what you wrote. And I don't know, I wonder for me, like, how can we cultivate this more in teachers? You call my attention to this aspect of just being able, and by the way, I would say this is true of me as a parent also, right? Like someone said to me, a mentor of mine said to me when my oldest was born, said, make sure you can stay in every moment, right? Like make time, mental time to be present in the moments because they move really fast.
Yeah, they do.
Right. And, you know, my kids are still little, like my oldest is 11, but you know, he's not cute anymore the way he was when he was 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Right. And there's all of these just like little moments that go really quick. And so I've always tried to make like Shabbat, like my mental time where I can try and be present. And I'm not always successful at it, but that's sort of my at least the indicator to me to just sit in this space with them and appreciate who they are at this moment. That's something that I've never heard someone articulate as a teacher, to actually take the time to be present with your students and appreciate where they are in this developmental moment. I don't know what thoughts you have on that.
Well, first of all, it's one thing to write something and another thing to live it. And all of us will struggle with that. Especially when we're writing, we tend to write the best version of whatever it is. So there are days where I succeed and there are days where I don't. But when I'm not succeeding, I have to remind myself like what's really going on. And so I'm gonna give you a quote, but I need to give context because it came from a time before the age that we live in.
Right.
When I was in teachers college, and these two guys were running a class, and the class was really like, it was sort of about teaching and pedagogy, but it was more just about like, this is what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
And they put up this quote, and this is the one that I had to put in context because it's very politically incorrect. It said, curriculum is like the plot in a porno film. It's only there to legitimize what's really going on.
Right.
And I didn't understand it. I didn't. First of all, there's a word in there that's charged, and so right away you're laughing, and your mind goes to the wrong place because it's just a highly charged word.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. But my brain, some part of my brain must have recognized the wisdom of what it was saying because I never forgot it. And that informs what I'm doing. So do I love math? Sure. Am I there to teach math? No. I'm there to teach kids, and math is my excuse. So math legitimizes my presence. And if a kid loves math, fantastic. You know, I'm your guy. We're aligned. But if a kid doesn't love math, I love them too. Like, why should you love math? Math is a weird, abstract, so you see them act out, and you're like, of course you're acting out. You're a child sometimes. And how wonderful is that? How wonderful is that we as humans have that transition from childhood to adulthood. You know, what a great thing. A kid is defying authority. They're defying you because you're the authority. It's very easy as a human to be offended, to get angry. And it happens to me sometimes. But they're not defying you. They're defying authority. And that's also part of that gaining independence. But we work in a system where the curriculum is prioritized heavily, especially if you teach math. I think it might be the most heavily prescribed curriculum in the Ontario, curriculum documents. It's like, you must do this, this, and this. It's about 300 expectations. You must cover them all. If you work at a private school, you're getting inspected every 2 years. An inspector's going to come in and make sure you're covering the curriculum. They have to be ready for next year. They have to be ready for university. They have to be ready. They have to be ready. They have to be ready. And then tie that into the fact that grades, everybody thinks that the reason the kids are there is to get grades instead of get an education. And you're living in that system, which is telling everybody explicitly one thing, but implicitly you're trying to do something else. But I think that more educators should reflect, because I think at our core, all of us understand that we're teaching kids, not curriculum. Mm-hmm. but it's easy to lose sight because of the pressure this artificial ecosystem creates. But if you take some time to reflect and just take a breath, and just look at this room. They're chatting. They're not paying attention to you. You're getting irritated. Well, take a breath and just look at the room. How awesome are these kids? They're just fantastic. And then you'll notice that, yeah, they're making a lot of noise and they're chatting. But one of them is because there's a girl who had a rough morning and her friend is talking to her about it. And you're like,
figuring out how to be humans in the world.
Yeah, and it's like, and no, that's not every conversation. Some of the conversations are stupid, but you're missing this human moment because you're getting irritated. Anyway, so I could go on for a very long time, but it's what kept me in teaching.
So I really like that. And I think that, part of my project to focus on skills as opposed to curriculum, and see the curriculum just as the prescribed thing that is meant to bring out the skills. And I'm a believer that we should be much broader in possible curricular avenues that students can use to build skills, right? So math builds certain very particular skills. Is math the only curriculum that can build those skills? No. Or let's even be, more precise. Is algebra the only subsect of math that can build those skills? And the answer is obviously no. And I think I in my most optimistic places, I think that education will change eventually. I think that education education is the one lagger that hasn't changed structurally in 150 years. That it's bound to change, yeah. And it's the one information-based industry that has not been disintermediated significantly, right? And so it's ripe to be disintermediated. So I really like what you're saying, because I think as you focus on skills, that also forces you to focus on the student, right? And not necessarily the curriculum, right? And so, but at the same time, you're taking it one step further. It's not just, am I evaluating it that my student, let's say in my case, has developed good reasoning skills, good analytic skills, or can extract two relevant pieces of information from a text and comment on them in a way that shows depth. It's actually starting to see them for who they are, and what they're experiencing. It's that great quote from the beginning of The Breakfast Club, that David Bowie quote, that these children that you spit on as you walk by, they're quite immune to your consultations. I'm going to get it wrong a little bit, but they're immune to your consultations. They're quite aware of what they're going through, right? And I think that's that struck me recently. I wrote this in an essay that actually was just published today. The students, their perspective as a high school student is their social lives. That is what is occupying their mind 80-90% of their day, right? And we as the teachers are thinking about maybe inspiring them, or about the curriculum. Their parents are worried about their mental health, and are they happy? But for them, their social life is everything. And we don't spend any time thinking about how their social lives are going. I mean, that's their world, right? And maybe that's good, right? Like you and I both know the teachers who get just a little too much into the students' social lives.
That's a problem.
Right? Which is itself a problem. But what you're talking about is something different. It's like stepping back and just appreciating, observing them anthropologically, watching what they're going through in this experience, and understanding that this is the moment for them.
There's a poem, which I'm going to look up. You've heard of Khalil Gibran?
I have. I don't know what the context is.
I'll look up the poem. I believe it's called On Parenting. On children. I won't read you the whole thing, just the part that I love.
Yeah, go for it.
Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might.
I like that a lot.
That poem sits in me all the time. I'm not there to teach them what I know.
It's true. Like it's a thing I think about a lot as a parent. Like my goal is not to make my kids like me. I actually had this recently with a friend who was talking about, his struggle with his child going off the derech, right? And not being religiously observant anymore. And I asked him in innocence, and I think it was maybe an insensitive question, but I asked him, why does it bother you so much? He's a thinking guy. And so he answered me, he said, I think in some sense we all want our kids to be like us, to be copies of us. And that sort of struck me, right? Because I think it's true, but I didn't think that way. Like, I really don't think that way. And I think maybe I'm somewhat different, like, than a lot of my friends on this particular issue of staying observant, staying engaged Jewishly, and so on. And this is now we could get into a whole new conversation, which we don't have time for, but of what that is. Maybe that's our next podcast. Like, is that a healthy expression of parenting philosophy? But just to bring it back to education for a moment, we do that as educators without thinking about it. Like, we might be self-conscious as parents of maybe not trying to make our kids too much like us. But that's exactly what we're doing when we're the teacher and we say, this is the curriculum, this is the standard. Success is that you will either love this as much as I love it or pretend to love it or succeed in it, right? Such that you're expressing your level of interest in it to the level that I have as the teacher of this subject.
Right.
And that's essentially saying, be like me.
For me, success as a teacher comes from helping them not let themselves down. That's the best I could do. I'm going to feel successful if you, as a student in my class, reflect on how you've done or how you performed, and you don't feel like you let yourself down. So, man, nobody should be like me. Like people always say, I'd love to be in your head. You would not.
Yeah, that's always good.
But I guess, to go back to Gibran, it's like, I'm always aware of the fact that their future is theirs. It's not a place for me to be or live in or to understand. So all I am is a cobblestone on the path of their life.
Right.
So let me do my best to not be the one where they snap their ankle. Like just, what an honor it is to support that in any way. Where we fall down, not we as educators, but we as an educational institution or the institution of education, we fall down is because we keep forgetting that. Look, your course, the MME course that I'm going to, it's an important course, but your, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the exact facility. Your facility with the names of the people, who Jabotinsky is and what his, and you just know it. Well, nobody in that class is going to have that facility. No. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine.
And I think we make these decisions as schools. Like in the case of Modern Middle East, we as a school say every senior has to take this course, right? And for that reason, I think that what we're stating is we want every one of our children to have something out of this. And I struggle with, well, what is that, right? It's not going to be that they are going to be as interested in the history of the modern Middle East as I am, and are going to be as animated by the thinkers who shaped that, that on the Jewish side, the Arab side, Turkish side, as I am. But there's something that we want all of them to have. Otherwise, we wouldn't require it of all of them, right? What is it because we can't have no indoctrination. No indoctrination would itself be some indoctrination, right? So,
yes.
There's some element of indoctrination we're choosing.
Neil Peart, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Exactly. So I've defined that for better or worse. Right now, my working definition is, the skills we're working on is 75% of the course, right? So that's just, we're using this material for you to develop your higher order thinking skills. The 25%, that's knowledge, right? That's something I want you to walk away with about this particular curriculum and this particular subject. my phrase has been Shabbat table conversant, right? Like I want, if this topic comes up at some Shabbat table in the future, because that, Israel will come up, the Middle East will come up eventually, that you have some basic information. You can access some basic framework. If someone says something that sounds really wrong, you could be like, yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. I remember this. And that is the maximum I could expect of the majority of students in my class.
There's more going on in your class and in all of our classes. But because I've been attending your class, I'm observing. It's funny. It's an interesting position to be in. So I'm another teacher.
Yeah.
I'm an intruder in some sense. I'm not a student. I'm not a teacher, but I am a teacher. So I observe a lot of things at once. And I'm able to observe what they're learning from you, or what I hope they're learning from you. And it isn't just about Herzl and Jabotinsky and Achada. It's not just about them. They're also learning how you are deciding to present the material. They're learning how you are articulating your thoughts, when you hold back, when you don't. We all know as teachers that sometimes we say too much. We're very in love with the sound of our own voice. You should acknowledge
Sure
it.
are.
Any teacher who doesn't think so is probably lying to themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we get on a roll. They know when you're doing it. They know when you're consciously pulling back. They're learning that they can do that too. They're seeing how you get passionate about it, and it can be, other people would just find you to be just a history nerd, and they're seeing you embrace something without shame. Like, yes, I'm a history nerd, and just think about, you get really excited.
Right.
Those are the lessons that we don't realize we're teaching because we think we're teaching the curriculum. But it's like with anything, we're modeling how a human can be, and it doesn't mean that it's good, bad. It's not relevant. It's just this is a potential human. This is a way that a person can communicate.
That's what sticks with people. Also, like people who talk about Rav Soloveitchik as a teacher. I mean, people who experienced his classes talk about the theater that was his presentation, and he's popped into my head because they recently digitally remastered Tradition Journal. Digitally remastered some of an 8-part lecture series that he did in 1958, and you can see it, like you can hear it in his voice, and here's his mastery of English is amazing, but his accent is heavy. He has this heavy, like Lithuanian Jewish accent, but he had a drawl, he had a way of presenting, and I get why that sticks with people, and that's, as a student, that's what you that's what you observe. Your great teacher has passion for their subject. Right. And that's something that sticks with you.
I've been doing it long enough now that people I've taught have kids of their own, which is another part of the honor of being an educator is these sort of saplings that you encountered are trees. And maybe if you're lucky, you get to see the tree, you get to learn about the growth in between. And I have never had I've had lots of students, former students, tell me something they remember about my class or some impact I had. Never once has it been about math. Not once. Not once. It's always, and then one day you said this, and I don't even remember saying it. My usual response is, I don't remember saying that. It sounds like something I would say, but I don't remember saying it. Like, I never forgot it. And it's never about math. So what am I doing? Like if somebody thinks I'm a math teacher, which is just coming back, I guess, to like, what are we teaching? You go out with a group of adults. Maybe you're just getting to know each other. One of the first, topics of conversation: what do you do for a living?
Right.
I'm a teacher. And okay, what do you teach? And I know what answer they want, but I never give them the answer they want. My answer is always, I teach kids. And then they kind of roll their eyes, or they're like, whatever. And I don't get into the conversation about why I answered it that way, because maybe they're not interested. But then I say, I teach math. And then they say, oh, I was so bad at math.
Right, everyone has that.
I was good at math until I had this one teacher who ruined it for me. It was the teacher.
School runs deep with people. School, you can start a conversation. You can get people onto their experience in school, and it runs deep with people.
Of course it does. It's the thing you think you are for the most formative years of your life. You think you're a student. I've been a non-student for triple the time that I was a student, not triple, but like approximately. And yet still,
it's interesting you say it, because that gesture itself is significant. The fact that we take kids and make them students in their formative years, that identity, if in its best form, is an identity of being a learner. Of course, that could be killed in school, and you could think of student as having nothing to do with learning, having a bunch to do with trying to figure out the things you're told you need to figure out.
Which is where we are. But
Right, exactly. But in its best form, right, it's saying, I want your formative years, I want you to have this identity of learning, of being open to the world and learning about it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we're out of time. This was fun.
Yeah, it was.
Thanks, Rich. Bye, everybody.